roll call of the commissioner.
Yes. Chair and Commissioner Alden Daniel,
President.
Vice Chair and Commissioner Elaine Reese,
Present.
Commissioner Manaska Alcantara,
Present.
Commissioner Ngozi Okaro,
Present.
Commissioner Nicole Yearwood.
Present.
Thank you. We have quorum. Actually, we have all the commissioners. And I welcome the commissioners enough. The first order of business is the approval of the minutes for July 28th, 2022. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
I so move.
We have a motion, we have a second. Any discussion? No discussion on the minutes approval, so we already have a motion to approve. A second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Abstentions, hearing none, the motion passes. Next, we have section 3, old business, update on the meeting with the city council speaker. The city council speaker was informed this morning, a phone call and a subsequent email. Speaker's office to our executive director, Victor, that the speaker is ill today. They proposed a rescheduling for September 30th, which I believe is next week or the following. On September 30th, they said at 12:30. Yeah, so we really wanted in person. So September 30th, it could be hybrid. Let me see, so September 30th is a
Friday.
Friday, okay, interesting. Friday, September 30th at 12:30. And there, you know,
I'm not available in person, but I could.
Yeah, same.
hybrid, okay. Anyone else?
It's hard for me, but I'll try to see what happens.
Yeah, good hybrid.
So maybe we do the hybrid. Option for them? Next we can do both, they could come here, we could go there. Well, hybrid option is. Right. If not, then we just go complete. Hybrid, option for the date that they provided, September 30th.
Is it possible for me to click in on my phone?
Yeah.
If it's
hybrid,
Yeah,
yes.
it's hybrid.
Yeah,
you gotta make sure you have, you gotta test it before. You can test it with, maybe Mike or someone here can help you test it before.
What's the platform?
The city uses, web, no, they use web.
WebEx?
That's usually what they use as the official platform.
Okay.
WebEx or Teams.
All teams of the group.
Before Teams.
But it's whatever they platform, we'll do it. Okay.
Let's see.
Me neither.
So we'll go ahead and tell them that yes, it's September 30th, 12:30. Whether it's here or there, but that we can set up a hybrid option.
Is it in 1 hour or?
Yeah, let's try, we'll keep about an hour,
Okay.
maybe we'll do it on that.
Okay, I will try to be in person, but I don't know. And there's always the chance, I'm afraid, of it being again.
Yeah, that's a good assumption.
Yeah, on the
I mean,
Friday.
if you
So
know,
we can move
I
whatever.
wouldn't, if you have something very important, I wouldn't move that for this. Continue, because like Commissioner said, there's always a possibility that we'll be scheduled.
Yeah.
Council, but if you can make it, you can make it. I think it's important for us to just meet with them in relation not to legislation you'll perform by them, city council today and the EEPC, but just overall touching base in general, right? Like a group touching base, and then also a conversation about the report that was just released.
Well, it's also raising the concern at that level of getting wonderful mandates, unfunded mandates,
Yeah. Absolutely.
and the impossibility of our performance, which is not what the council wants.
Yeah, foremost in any conversation is the head count, the EPC, the funding and the unfunded mandates. Next we have in section 3, subsection 3, of old business, The establishment of the EPC Employment Advisory Committee, the first meeting was held on September 14th, 2022, and Executive Director Jean Victor has reported.
Right, so everyone should have a copy of the minutes that were taken from the first advisory committee meeting. I think we had a pretty good turnout. The turnout is listed at the front page of the minutes. Essentially, we talked a lot of administrative things, such as how often we were going to meet, which will be once every other month for 1 hour. And essentially just talking about the purpose of why we wanted to meet. And the main purpose would be, to collaborate with other agencies to make sure we're not duplicating efforts, to kind of inform the EEPC with a brain trust of people from different agencies that may be able to help us with the work that we're trying to accomplish. And essentially, help us to access data if need be. So we had some discussion. The chair opened up the discussion part of the meeting with several comments about, the first one was really about the underutilization of women and minorities in city government, and how underutilization is distinct from underrepresentation. Talked about some of the technical challenges posed in the measurement of underutilization concerning availability, how availability is key and underutilization turns on that. And what more can be done in terms of opportunities for current employees. The chair also mentioned that, it may be time to rethink the civil service listing and how we go about selecting people from the civil service list if we wish to create diversity and begin to remediate underutilization. Chair, did I give you a fair representation there?
Points have been hammering me. Points people are tired of hearing me say.
And Commissioner Pinnock was very gracious. She let us know about some of the initiatives that DPAS was proposing to work on, including a study on pay equity, and that they are part of a committee or some sort of council on pay equity. And she mentioned that at the next meeting, she could have a presentation given on what they're doing around pay equity. They were awaiting word from the new administration to see if there would be any changes to the executive order on pay equity. They were still waiting to hear on that.
In reading your notes, I just want to highlight that she reiterated her support for us, for the committee, and that it really was, I mean, it seems as though it's beginning to break down what I call the silos between DCAS and EEPC, to the extent that there won't be a duplication of effort with it. That's a good thing for everybody. And so I think that should the committee just accomplish that, that's a great step forward. So I compliment you on that. And the issue of CUNY and using civil service is, since I sit on the CUNY, I chair the CUNY's Civil Service Commission, it really ain't much different than what happens here. I don't know what she's talking about in terms of bans. The truth is, we sit there with appeals from tests, and they're all on the same list. And the colleges are still dealing with having to take the top people from the list. So I don't know what she was talking about, because it's certainly not anything I understand. And I don't know how I am sympathetic to the chair's concern about civil service listing and how it evolves. But that's something larger than this commission can ever turn over. I mean, that's embedded in every labor union contract, and those unions are not going to give that up. So I mean, it's just something, I wouldn't go there. I just leave it. It's too hot a potato. It just isn't going to change. It's embedded in law and contract. You find that with the state. It's just embedded. And there's,
But can I add, what is embedded is that we have to work in civil service. It's not embedded in how the process works. So if civil service were to change the way they do business, my mandate is you go through civil service. If they improve, we benefit. So it is in everyone's best interest for them to change their practices to help all the other agencies. Otherwise, it's very difficult.
but it's embedded in the statute. I don't know how you change that, is where I'm starting from.
Number one.
No, that we couldn't change, I agree. But what I'm saying is in our statute, in my union agreement, it says that we need to hire specific positions through civil service. Now, civil service establishes how we go about the hiring. I will pick from the top scores. You have to offer the jobs to every single person in that, thing before you're able to move to the next category of people. And what I'm saying is top scorers, what I've seen so far in my positions, are not related to minorities. Always they tend to be either white people or Asians. And I actually haven't even seen Asians in the positions that I have. It's mostly white individuals and now more girls, which is a good thing. More girls you see as top scorers. But if there is not a fit between the agency and a top scorer, because it's not only the score that you're hiring the full person with the full set of responsibilities. You're not able to get out of that system. You need to offer it to her before you can go to the person that you want. And you have to go down the list of these are the people. So that is something that I agree is up to civil service to do. But if they change, we all benefit. Is how I feel about it.
I'm sort of sitting there. Civil service is not.
Within
it is embedded in the regulations. I don't know how you change that.
The thing is that,
And unfortunately, it's to the benefit of seniority within the union membership not to change it. So you're operating against
the thing is,
overwhelming odds.
our reports, our mandate and our reports are to make recommendations to make progress along this issue of underrepresentation, legalization, diversity, and inclusion in the municipal workforce. So, I agree with you. History shows us. History is replete with examples of things that are embedded, either in the Constitution or either in law, that are disadvantageous to certain groups. And notwithstanding whether it's the civil service exam system, right? I think everything is open to interrogation.
But there's no question that we can make an observation.
No,
come
more
forward with.
than an observation. I think the observations have been made already by, I think the occupational segregation report this agency did in 2018 already made the observation. I think that the report is in 2 years before that made the observation. I think the observation that, for example, not single one group, but for example, that let's say Black women are, overwhelmingly represented in lower paying job groups and not represented in the higher paying job groups of fire supervisors, administrators, managers, might be embedded and it might be part of some systemic civil service thing, but that's not acceptable. It's not acceptable to many people. So uncovering that, figuring out what does that mean that's embedded, I think is actually at the very core of our mandate to see well, what is it? What do we mean is embedded? What is embedded? Is there some type of biases in the exam? Is there some type of biases in the way the list is called or the way it's ranked, the way it goes down? And I think the creativity among the commissioners and among the staff, I harken back to an example that Commissioner Alcantara mentioned that I think many people nodded their heads when she mentioned it, is that there may not be a whole huge difference between someone who gets 100% in an exam and someone who gets a 94%. They actually may be able to do the job equally well. And it may not be this rank order of the list. You know, it may be, let's take the top 10% of achievers and then see from that, you know, did that demographically representative of the city, and then be able to say there's a certain mismatch that we have to correct for, and then you can hire based on trying to correct underutilization or underrepresentation. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's politically even not feasible. I'm just saying in order to have different outcomes over the next 30 years than we've had for the last 30 years, you have to do something differently. Otherwise, you're just reproducing the disparity. And in certain instances, being part of the agency that perpetuates.
I
And I
don't
don't think there's an
disagree with
appetite.
you. I'm merely making the standpoint that the statement change civil service and change their process, I think is just an incredible thing. We can, however, comment on what it does and the fact that there are distortions. We can, in fact, point out where there is underrepresentation, but we're not the city council who's just, for 20 years, we have pointed out the lacks within the fire department. It's the city council who by legislation has mandated that the fire department must show improvement in X, Y, and Z. We don't have that power. It's part of what what Jennifer and I were talking about before, which is in fact, as you go forward with testimony, one of the give backs you ask from the city council is there some way that we get some ability to penalize people who are not performing. We don't have that power. But the city council certainly can, based on the evidence in front of them, go forward and say to the fire department, you have to show us where you're employing women. You have to show us where you're employing minorities when you have X amount of time in which you show us that improvement. My understanding only from the press is that's what the council has just done. But we just don't have that power.
Well, I mean, we may not have the charter power to effectuate that change, and from the likes of it, I think arguably maybe the city council hasn't had that power either, but we certainly have the responsibility to put forth solutions or recommendations and changes, either legislatively to, you know, the civil service system. Otherwise, not much of what we do is going to have any kind of.
Well,
And
there
you know-
are a whole lot of positions that are not within civil service. And there are a whole lot of positions within the city that are not civil service. So we can do a lot within the non-civil service. And most of the managerial jobs are non-civil service.
That's true. That's true. So the next, any further conversation on the EEPC Employment Advisory Committee? Anyone who also attended it want to speak about it? Okay, no more conversations around old business. Let's turn our attention to section 4, subsection A on new business, the introduction of Bill 5, the introduction of 515, the charter amendments to comparable worth analysis.
So, today at 1 o'clock, there'll be a hearing at, across the street, City Hall, in the committee room, regarding, an amendment, to our charter language, in which, city council would be directing us to engage in a comparable work analysis for, as I understand it, all of the city agencies and employees. Today is the testimony on that.
Without defining comparable worth within the piece of legislation. I mean, at the very least, there ought to be some definition of comparable work.
Is it defined in the legislation?
It's not really defined, it's very nebulous, and we've had an opportunity to speak with some members of city council. I really even can't even tell you their names because there was really no introductions, but they were not members of council, but they were staff members. And I asked the question, what did they envision by this language? And a gentleman got on the call and said that what was envisioned was that we would go to every single agency and meet with the agencies and define every role and study these roles and put together a matrix on what each role entails in order to determine its worth.
So
Excuse me?
For the work of what, the salary?
The worth of the job.
So what, and I actually I did look at, I think it was Michael, I don't know if it was you or Michael, who sent over the articles. It's just,
Yeah.
sometimes it's jargon, because once I read one of the articles, I was like, oh, I know exactly what this is getting at. It's basically what they want to know, and I think what they want us to do is say, this is the salary that should be for this role, whether a man has it or a woman has it. It should not change because this is what the salary should be. And so I think, it made me think of issues, for instance, and I had tennis on the brain. So I thought about Serena and like a woman winning a tennis championship, the pot of money was bigger for the male, right? Whatever it was, whether it was the US Open or Wimbledon, the male championship, and I forget the formal term, but their pay was higher than the woman's pay. If both of us win the championship, it should be the championship is worth $200,000. The woman wins hers, she gets 200, the man wins his, he gets 200. And I think that that's what the comparable worth analysis means, is that whatever the job is and the value that's attached to it, it should not change whether it's a woman, whether it's a Black woman, a white man. The value and the salary for that role should stay consistent, no matter who gets the job.
Nicole, I agree with you, but the problem is, as Jean just outlined it, let me just argue from the legal.
Yeah.
All general counsels are not equal. Because all the tasks under general counsels differ depending on the agency. So the general counsel for the police department may be very different than the tasks that the general counsel has for this agency. There are less people, the issues are different. And so so the title is not the same. The title is the same, but the tasks are different. But asking us to enumerate just that title against 40 different agencies is an enormous task. And there's going to be a variable of payment based on the number of years the person has been there, based on their expertise, based on their background. It's not the same as if you win the tennis open, this is the pocket of money. It is a different piece. I agree with you. We all should be paid equally. Trust me, as coming out of Columbia Law School, 1964, I know exactly what you're talking about. That being said, it's beyond the capacity of us to do that. And to the extent that the statute, that what they're asking us to do does not indicate what comparable worth is. They've got to define it in order for us to be able to audit it. And then what they're looking for as we audit it, what are they really asking us to do? And how are we supposed to do it? If we don't have enough staff, and unless they relieve us of what we're doing now, it's an impossibility. What they're trying to do is a good thing.
Right.
But telling us to do it without defining it, without giving us the number of staff to do it, is just creating another impossibility.
And I agree, and I definitely, I didn't get to the capacity conversation yet, but I agree regarding capacity. I don't think we have the capacity to do that. But in terms of course, agencies, I don't think that they're necessarily saying that the general counsel for one agency would get paid the same as another agency because of just size, et cetera, all the factors. But I think is, if I walk in and interview for the position of general counsel at a particular agency, I should be offered a particular amount. It should not change based on who they're offering the job to. And I think that that's where it gets tricky, where at times there are people, of course, who are doing similar jobs in the same agency and not getting
Getting the same
paid,
pay, right?
all
Commissioner
things
Arnold?
being equal.
So I think that there are a couple of things, and I want to take the part about whether there's funding for the work off the table, right? I think that's a completely separate discussion. But what so just to stay with tennis,
And I'm sorry, in terms of the definition of comparable work, I don't think they added it to the legislation because there is a general definition of the term. Like when you say comparable work, so for instance, the documents that you sent me, the definitions were the same. That's what comparable work is. So once you know what the term is, then you say, okay, so it doesn't need to be defined in the legislation because there is a standard for what that means. You get what I'm saying? Like, we didn't necessarily know I didn't know what it meant initially. And then when I looked, I was like, oh, I know exactly what this is. I just called it something else, but I knew what they were getting at. So
Yeah, but it
Sorry.
really truly has to be in the legislation, Nicole. I disagree.
so I think a couple of things. One, so if we're going to talk about tennis, right? So Indian Wells tournament is not going to pay as much as US Open, but
Right.
Indian Wells men's and women's champions should make the same, right? So then if we're talking about general counsel of an agency that has 50,000 employees, that might be different pay than a general counsel of an agency that has 1,000 employees. But that doesn't mean that there can't be a band to explain the methodology behind why this agency, just a band. So 5,000 or more employees, it's this, whatever. But I think in terms of comparable worth, a lot of those articles were very old. And I think that the discourse has changed, right? Courts used to say that, like, oh, it's too murky, it's too confusing to do this with this Title VII. But things have changed, right, in the intervening 30 years, right? Some of these articles were before I went to law school. So I think that it could be possible to deal with comparable work. I think I read somewhere that New Zealand's government is doing comparable work, right? So to me, it seems like rather than we can't do it or we don't understand it, I would take the position, well, it could be possible. This is what we understand comparable worth is, but we would need funding to come up with a rubric to even investigate and to hire somebody to do the work, right? So then
Yeah.
rather than argue about this, that, the third, there's foundational issues. Yes, it does seem reasonable. We would need to make some investment. And is that investment available? Then we can have the conversation. But otherwise, like we're arguing or discussing something that we don't have the full picture on.
If I may, the proposed legislation is it starts off by directing the agency heads to look at their own compensation and occupational segregation within their own agencies and annually report that out. And for the life of me, I can't understand why they would ask us then to also create this
Matrix.
study. To me, it makes no sense. We don't set compensation, and the Office of Labor Relations sets compensation. So why wouldn't they be looking at something like this?
Yeah. And I mean, I also looked at it differently. I was also thinking about comparable worth, and it's in the context of the different jobs, the charts that we looked at last meeting. I mean, to me, comparable worth isn't just this police officer doesn't make as much as that police officer. It's also, okay, so social workers maybe have to have 4-year degrees and they have to have certain amount of experience. Well, why are social workers making $10,000, right?
And
And
sanitation.
engineers who have to have 4 years of work or 4 year degree and certain amount of experience, why are they making so much more? right? And so it's not just like, well, why are women in these jobs? And I think I saw
So
some
the
notes here.
value of the work.
Right. Who decided that this is what this job pays? And do we need to, as a polity, reassess how much a job pays based on the objective qualification? So it's not just that women's work pays less
Right.
because, oh, whatever, women's work pays less because we decided that these jobs that women mostly do, we're gonna devalue them.
Right.
Where I'm caught up, is it comparable worth to whom? Comparable worth to the society? Because if it's comparable worth to the society, we have just determined that education gets less than police. And security is more important than education. Now, who are we in terms of that to change the valuations?
That's not what I'm saying.
I know that.
Right. So I'm saying philosophically, we're not here to have a philosophical discussion. We can't like make society decide, oh, education is very important,
Teachers
right?
should be paid.
But what we can do is say, we think that if there's a requirement of a college degree and 5 years of work, then the position should be paid somewhere in this range, whether it's a sanitation worker or a school administrator.
Yeah, this is a really, really great conversation. And another example of how this legislation needs to be more developed. Hopefully in conflict representation with us. And another indication where with or without a study, I've seen this movie and the answer is somewhere in the civil service exam and the union contracts. Because they establish the value, the pay and the work.
Right.
So I don't know why, if you want to know comparable worth, then just go to the contracts, go to civil service and reverse engineer your way backwards and see who the demographics are that are affected. And that's a far easier study to do. But again, folks are not consulting us in that regard.
But hold on, is that in your testimony? Because that's, yeah, that should be in your testimony.
It's not-
And I don't remember if that's in there. I read it last
Yeah,
night.
I
think we should put that in there. That
It's
makes
pretty
sense.
controversial though, but
But if.
it's not controversial maybe for us, for EEPC to take that independent study, but it will save people a whole lot of work and a whole lot of energy to try to do a study that tells people what they already know and then comes
Right.
up against what Commissioner Reese says. It's a
Right.
systemic, embedded, built in, and who are we to even?
Right.
No, but
Those contracts
but-
and civil service process.
There's a piece here that actually is missing. Why come to us and not go to labor relations? It's really almost a question. Why come to us and ask us to do the audit and not go to labor relations?
Because we are, you know what, it's really in our name. I would say what's in the name, equal employment practices. We are bringing the equity. Labor relations, they feel like it deals literally with the labor and the work, but we are supposed to bring equal.
I understand that, but we have no ability to have any
No.
penalty and we have no particular power other than, quote, we can audit.
Right.
But without the capacity to audit, without the definition of what you're looking for, you're creating
So
You're
who's
creating something that will not happen.
So who's
We're
gonna-
trying to be helpful. Ngosi's right. We're trying to say, we understand what you're aiming at,
Yeah.
but the tool that you have created to us has some serious lacks. The tool that you've created is not looking at areas within the city where there is some information, Office of Labor Relations. And looking at the actual contracts, looking at some of the job requirements that the agencies could supply to us. So we have some sense of what tasks are involved. We are not people who can analyze the value of particular tasks. That too is beyond our expertise. We can evaluate data and performance, but not go to evaluate whether what the social worker does in their caseload is the same as what the policeman has as his caseload. That's beyond our capacity.
Right, but that's not what I said though.
I know.
Okay,
And I think what they probably want us to do, now that just in thinking about it, on this conversation, is they want to have the data somewhere so that then they could pull it and take whatever actions they need to take. So maybe right now, the data for this comparable work conversation is not really organized in any way, shape, or form where they can take action. So it's like, oh, let's have an agency, let's have the entity get the data for us, so then when we come out with the report, because they'll be the ones that can leverage some type
Legislation,
of
yeah.
penalty, legislation, et cetera. So we might just end up being the data collectors for them to take action later. So then they could say, EEPC reported, blah, 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 blah,
I
blah.
think you're right, Nicole, but we need to know what
We
kind of data they're looking for.
Absolutely. And we
And
need
that's not there.
And we need capacity.
And we need capacity.
But then we.
That is what you were saying.
Or no?
And the EPC,
yes, that is what I said, thank you.
Team up with labor relations.
I don't know.
Use their data and just analyze their data.
and now that we have full complement of commissioners, more staff at least, not as short staffed as before. We really need to brainstorm what Commissioner Yearwood kind of punctuated is that, EEPC reported. We report a lot of stuff, but to be honest, no one, if people don't give a damn when you read it, it doesn't really matter. We have to do a better job, I guess, packaging and digestible, 3-4 people's attention span where the legislatures are nothing, are very low, believe it or not.
Right.
So we don't package 3 or 4 or 5 really succinct, clear recommendations or points and just keep hammering them away, regardless which new trend comes into favor, or which new hearing comes about. Even if it's a hearing about like sanitation, we should like punch our home. It should still be the same 5 points. If it's, because the 5 points haven't been addressed, and for decades. And I don't have, whether it's occupational immigration, pay disparity, the worth of value as a proof of creation versus, supervising firefighters. So, and then the issues around good data, around who's available, who's qualified. And, the judgment calls, the values made out of it. And then the last thing, this whole merit-based civil service system, which has a lot of pros to it, very good reason of its existence, but many would argue it's not necessarily working to produce the kind of progress we need to have a workforce that's reflective of the diversity, equity, inclusion that many of us hope for. So I think that, we really, should at some point beyond this meeting, think of what are those 5 things that we've already kind of proven with our last reports, so that we don't need another legislation to prove what was already proven. And we know data changes, but data doesn't necessarily change from year to year all that much, unless there's a great deal of intentionality. I don't think I've seen in this nation that intentionality has changed anything around the social outcome within a year. So, this.
But what you said, do we have a report that we can cite that touches on any of this?
We do, like.
And we can push, so maybe we also add that, I'm sorry, we added the last, but maybe we talk about our report that we have that says X, Y, Z, and forgive me if it's in there.
Even when you, Commissioner O'Carroll and others mentioned, even, in terms of,
Let's push
for
out the
example,
report. We already did.
when we focused on police, sanitation, HRA, DSS, and you looked at, how long it took to max out in salary and how, even there, which is all a function of contracts. And we saw that like with social workers or caseworkers with masters, which with agencies that are majority women, it took like, the max out was like a 7 years versus some of the uniform ones we saw was like 5 years. And that's a structural thing that like could be altered. So yeah, our reports, maybe we don't like punctuate it as pinpoint it as as strongly as we should, but I think that with this report, with the previous, and then with the occupational segregation one, which Michael, you might correct me, but I think that was around 2018. 2018, yes. There's a lot there. And even, and that's not even leveraging what our colleagues have, like DCAS. I'm sure they're probably, I can't speak for them, but maybe their reports don't have the kind of traction that they would hope for either in terms of all the work that gets, a lot of work gets put into these analyses and a lot of, only for it to then not be looked at and come up with another legislation. That's probably asking us to do the kind of the same thing but with a different twist, depending on what the new code word is or the new keyword is, and I just think that, we really gotta, punctuate what's already been done. Commissioner Alcantara?
Yes, I was gonna say that I read the letter and I think that in the letter, we establish what we do, which is a lot, that is great. But if given the opportunity to go to provide a testimony for all these people, I think that we should take those few minutes to put in their faces the findings of our report. And in here, I know that we start with, according to Indeed, the search website says blah, blah, blah. I would start with in our last report, or even in the following section where we talk about the report that we did, our report found 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this is, very similar to a worth analysis, comparable worth analysis would provide, so they see what we find. Because when we talk about what we do, but we don't show the impact of what we do. And I apologize for saying this at the 11th hour. I have been all over the place.
I say Gene's gonna kill us.
Yeah.
I did last night.
But I think that showing is better than telling.
Yeah.
If we,
Or do we have the blown up tables that are asked for? No.
I will go with 1, 2, 3, 5. That will be because then you will capture their attention. If we go into, and the press says, no, this is our job, and our job is telling us that, these people make all this money, Black women are not in the market, blah, blah, blah. We're happy to do what you're asking, but are we serious about this and how we go about it? Like, I didn't see explicitly our findings, and I thought, I'm so impressed with your report and the work that Aldrin and Elaine have put into the report, and all of you guys, that I'm like, I will showcase it. As soon as I walk in, before I'm Jean, I'll be like, let me tell you what we found. And then go on with the report. Because then that will be more impactful, I believe. Because it will show that you're serious, that we take our job serious. That's my 2 cents.
No, but then can I build on that for a minute,
Commissioner,
which is to
let me
say,
recognize Commissioner.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, I was just going to double down a little bit on what Commissioner Alcantara said, because just because they invited you to talk about one thing doesn't mean that you can't talk about something else. And so I always say that, like, people who invite me to come be on a panel or a keynote and tell me to talk about one thing will be tied to them. I'm going to talk about what I want to talk about. And so sometimes what people are asking you for, you need to lay the foundation for it. And that's how I go to, and I think that's what you're talking about, Commissioner. Like, okay, you're interested in this and we can talk about this, but I want to educate you on what we have been doing and what our findings are. And if I could, in that way, the whole conversation is different, because it doesn't, not saying that this is the case, but like sometimes what people are looking for from us is like busy work. And it's just like making more work, but there's actually substantive work that has been done that they might not understand.
but I would add to that, which is,
Please, I need that piece of advice for my life.
no, but I want to add,
Busy with it.
I would add to that, because it comes back to my question, what's comparable work? This is what we've shown. what does this proposed legislation want to alter or change from what we've shown? Because if you just look at what the local law requires us to show you annually for the last 8 years, it's the data that you're looking for. It really is going to your point. It's the data you're looking for. We have already found this disparity, this fact that there is unequal. We believe that's comparable worth, but you don't define it, so we're not sure, but that's what we've found.
Yeah.
Why do we need this additional piece of why do we need this amendment? It's another way of getting at the.
Right, and not even why do we need it, but let's talk about what we have, because maybe this will offer what it is you're looking for. This might satisfy your objective.
Yeah. We're sorry to do this to you, Jean.
Jean is a professional. She'll be fine.
Okay.
She's a
Well,
good
she has a team,
writer.
she has a good team.
Yeah. You guys write very well.
Which means we have to really get this meeting.
So you-
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chair.
So they get to work.
So, let's go. So we took care of the budget cuts, the PEG.
I saw that.
You all saw the letter.
Yeah.
It starts off with the beautifully,
What does that?
Mayor Adams likes us to work together to get stuff done. In this case, they want us to get cuts done.
Are these letters applied to agencies like yours? For the bigger people?
Not everybody,
Across the board.
including us.
We've been here before.
We can
We
really,
can
we
donate
can
the
say we're
fee.
not under the jurisdiction of these cuts and tie up the O and B for a while at least. Say they were independent.
No, but what we can do is buy less paper and donate it.
Is there, I mean, that will hurt us in other ways, but well, anyway, that's
We've
another
already-
conversation.
Yeah.
Well, so next we'll turn to the audit update.
Okay.
Status of employment practices audit, we got really busy, huh?
Yeah.
Turn
Yes.
to-
So, the newest update we have for the employment practices audit that's focusing on underutilization. Today I have 4 final resolutions, final determined resolutions for you to vote on.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Nice.
The issuance of a final determination indicates that an agency has finished its audit and is now going into the compliance monitoring period of its audit. So it hasn't quite finished its audit, it's finished the evaluation portion. There are another
The
3,
agencies that were previously audited by us that had to be under correction.
no, the
This
ones,
is their new one.
this is the audit that we started this year. We finished the review and evaluation of their current practices, and this marks what they need to still implement because we found that it was a hole in their program. So there are another, I believe, 3 agencies that I wanted to get on here for you today, but it's not gonna happen until probably tomorrow, so you'll see them at the next meeting. And we are also moving forward with the rest of the agencies, and I anticipate having a ton more for you next time you're here. And that is it for the employment practices of it.
Thank you. It says, we're voting on 3 resolutions, but I see 4. Is that
Oh, that's a typo on my part, it is 4. I was literally putting one in at 4 o'clock last night, so I missed it on the agenda.
And the 4 are all, resolutions, to, let me read the last whereas. So they're all being resolved, in the same way.
To issue the final determination, which then marks compliance monitoring, and to enter into the compliance monitoring period, well, we will work with the agencies to implement any of the remaining corrective actions, which are set forth in the actual resolutions.
And, in terms of, we have the Bronx Borough President's Office, Department of Buildings, Brooklyn Borough President's Office, Campaign Finance Board. Jennifer, do you think it's okay to take them as a bundle?
Yes.
All right, so we'll bundle all 4 resolutions. Do we have a motion to approve the final determination resolutions for the 4 agencies mentioned? You have a motion to approve. We have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Abstentions? Hearing none, the motion passes. Next, we have the status of community board employment practices audit.
So we just initiated the community boards for this particular year. There are 15 of them. We had to create a truncated audit because of the nature of their EEO program is dependent on the borough president's office. So we have sent out our initiation letters. We had informational sessions with the district managers and the chairs, which I found were really helpful and very enlightening to hear some of the challenges that the community boards face. We're sent out our preliminary interview questionnaire, which they're currently completing, and we'll begin the audits probably in the next week or so. They are a much shorter audit because community boards are subject to the borough president's EEO program. But we are required to audit them as a separate entity. So that's where we are from that. And that's again, another reason why I think at the next meeting, I'm gonna have a lot of stuff for you to review. Yeah.
Commissioner Reese?
Whatever happened, because we spent a lot of time discussing the training of community board
Yes.
members.
So-
And where is that? Because they are not employees, ergo, they're not part of our audit. But as the chairman has said before, we have some obligation to make sure that they are not either being discriminatory or being discriminated against.
So I've been doing some research and there's a lot of different players in this potential pot. There's the community boards, the borough president's community board unit, I guess, community liaison. There's also the borough president's EEO office. There's DCAS OCEI. There's DCAS Development and Learning. There's the mayor's office of community affairs. So I'm trying to kind of I'm still researching to do my digging to see who we need to reach out to give them our, I guess at this point, recommendation, directive, however we want to phrase it, that they ensure that the community board members get trained. And then we could probably, since it's not like a technical audit, we can develop some sort of way to ensure enforcement of that directive.
I would say the borough president and the city council. And Chair Bonilla can definitely chime in on this one. As a former community liaison many moons ago, they're appointed by, half are appointed by the city council member, and then half are appointed by the borough president, but the borough president is actually the person who does the appointments on both ends. So I would say those two, the council members and the VP, have jurisdiction over who actually becomes a member of the board.
Right, and we have had some, not necessarily to us, but we've heard through the community boards, just kind of tangentially, and also through OCEI, that some of the borough president's offices are finding, they're pushing back on their responsibilities over community boards with regard to EEO. So I think that is something worth exploring. There was a law department opinion apparently that came out when the vaccine mandate came out that said that community board members are subject to the vaccine. So I think we can make an argument ergo that they are also subject to other requirements such as training. But again, I'm still digging. There's a lot of moving pieces. So I'm hoping that we can kind of get that figured out and maybe start the new year with that kind of directive or instruction or
Training.
they definitely need to be trained. I don't have any doubt about that, but how that training is going to happen, who's going to make sure it happens, who's going to be responsible for overseeing it and kind of following up with the folks that don't, are not complying. I think that is something that's kind of outside of our purview because we're talking about thousands of people.
I want to throw it to your next meeting, your next meeting of the agencies. I think this is a shared problem with DCAS, and maybe there's an answer, not necessarily our answer, but maybe there's an answer that the groups together can come up with. The mayor's office is sitting there as well. And it really is a interesting issue. And maybe that's one that you just put out there and see whether or not you can come out with a discussion group that can deal with how to do with youth training. Because it is in some sense, both from the city council member and the mayor's member, a way of dealing with community organizations, and it becomes somewhat more political rather than less political, depending on the particular community board and the representation, and yet the obligation to be sure that there is no discrimination and there is no sexual harassment or bullying continues to be a shared obligation among the different agencies. So I would put it on your agenda to have a discussion about it. I don't mean to say, stop digging, Jennifer.
No, I'm doing a lot of the digging. I've been OCEI, I've had conversations with learning development. The conversations that I had at the community board information sessions, the presentation that I provided was very kind of eye-opening. So I think I might kind of do separate and apart from the community board audits, I might kind of do a little bit more digging in that area to see if, you know, kind of what are the concerns and where are the blind spots, like where is the ball being dropped, so that we can try to formulate some sort of plan as the EEPC to ensure that this gets rectified.
Section, thank you. And maybe the advisory committee. Section D, status of follow-up sexual harassment prevention practices audit.
So this is a very short status update. We have one sexual harassment prevention practices audit follow-up that is of the Kings County District Attorney's Office. They had 15 corrective actions last year. They only implemented 9. They were unable to implement 6. There was a new EEO officer. It was a lot of turnover during COVID. It was a lot. So we put them on the follow-up list. So we're initiating that audit probably next week. And we have our most seasoned analyst working on it so that hopefully they can get their EEO program with regard to sexual harassment in order. They are still going to be audited again as part of this current audit, but that's not going to happen for another 2 years, I think.
Thank you. Section 6, research update. Section A, 2022 CUNY Community Colleges Report.
This will be very short. It's just to let you know it's ongoing because it's part of local law 13. The decision was made before I started to separate it, the main report. So hopefully we'll have a draft for you before the next commissioners meeting. And that's it.
No, just,
Well, for part A.
Part B, 2023 local law 13 report proposals.
Yeah, so this actually, you had just spoken, Chair, about the need to maybe do smaller reports or break things up or to kind of make things more digestible. So what I would like to do for next year is to sort of, as opposed to thinking of local law 13 as the report, I would like to think of it maybe as a series of reports dealing with discrimination and underutilization. And so what I would like to do, I'm calling it so far the core report. That's not a great word for it, but where each year we produce a report first that's primarily tables and charts and figures on the data of underutilization from year to year so that people can see trends and compare agencies and which groups and which job groups and all of that. And then each year we would be doing a series of anywhere from 1 to 4, depending on the year, on specific issues within underutilization. And so for next year, we have several proposals, of which I think 3 are probably the most feasible to start working with now. There's been interest amongst Jean and others on the executive team, number 1, to look at provisionals, right? And looking at those job groups that have a higher percentage of provisionals and looking at underutilization there. You're laughing because
Provisionals is a huge problem all over the place.
Yes, and I mean, as you all know, DCAS has been formally examining this, I want to say since at least 2008, might have even been earlier than that. And so, but nobody's actually ever compared the two. And so I think that looking into that is something. We'd also like to look at compensation.
And provisionals, people hired outside of the civil service.
It basically, yes, when they're not supposed to have been, right? Or it was only supposed to be temporary, right?
Decades later, they're still there.
Exactly, right. And looking at those agencies and job groups to look at underutilization there and comparing. We also potentially can do something with compensation, although matching that data right now is a little bit more complicated than we thought. But we think that there can be something for that. So that would, for example, be, so if hopefully by February, we were able to publish what I'm calling the core report, which is just basically the numbers, then sometime a few months later, we would come out with a report on the provisionals. Also on our staff, they want to do a deeper dive into the administrative position, right? That's the highest paid median salary.
Those are the political appointments.
Well, right, but maybe that's.
Well, but
Yeah.
so you're talking about commissioners and then deputy commissioners. Those are by and large, for want of a better term, political appointments.
Right.
But what about all the other VPs that they bring with them?
So they'll become part of that, you may be then biting into provisionals.
Oh, okay.
So and provisionals generally are, they're people with civil service titles, but are operating outside of that title at a different level. So they are within, at least that's what the CUNY provisionals are. They are people who have a civil service title to rely on, but are operating outside of that title provisionally in another title.
And do they have is their salary tied to civil service or is it salary?
No, they have a salary tied to provisional.
They could go back to that civil service.
They can go back to their civil service title.
They're serving in another title provisionally, but if that was to end, they would be bumped back down to their. I think in the city, in what DCAS is tackling are those individuals where they're in a civil service title that an exam should have been given and hadn't been given for so many years.
That's right.
And so those people are serving as, say, administrative staff analyst, which I know is not an example that is relevant, but they're serving as a provisional administrative staff analyst for years and years and years because they couldn't take an exam to get on a list to be permanently appointed.
Right.
And there was a lot of issues concerning that. So I think that's where DCAS is trying to give a lot more exams. They're doing, incumbent exams. They're doing education experience exams where if you have a certain level of education, you'll have to sit for an actual test. But that I think is the majority of the provisionals that are still kind of working around.
DCAS is doing that because the labor unions got very upset. In fact, I do know as to CUNY, the labor union sued CUNY because the exams had not been given.
Right. And so in the one hand.
And so because the employees want the civil service protections
You can't get a
being
civil
in a new
service.
title and not being bumped back to a lower paying title.
Right.
Actually, this conversation is very much needed, but not right before the meeting and So I really want for the sake, for all of our sake, to kind of wrap up. Did you have anything else?
I would propose a report, just like talking about availability, labor market availability, to actually examine what would labor market availability be if we use the census as opposed to a civil service list and things like that. That would be the third one to take it to.
And that would be quite honest as to where the chair is coming.
Right, yeah.
Section 7, which is the conclusion, where we have a motion to exit public session and go into executive session for the purposes of a very brief personnel update.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, hearing none, we now go to a executive session. If you can turn off the light.